And that comes into the issue of least restrictive environments.
Yes. And that's the interesting part about this whole discussion of seclusion restraint is you can't discuss it without broaching a dozen other subject matters. And that's why you're not going to resolve any one particularly, because each one has its own conundrum once you open up, the Pandora's box there on each one of these areas. So obviously least restrictive environment is a whole other episode here in itself of your show.
Right. And certainly when it comes to the issue of related to the reporting issues and flexibility that is the backbone of the American educational system, of local control and the ability of local school districts and state schools districts to make decisions of what their public schools should have. But we're talking about actually a federal approach here,
we're in South Carolina,
which I think is the Republicans' issue with the Senate bill itself.
My thing is a safety issue, and this is why I've been writing on the area for, approaching on a decade now. The simple fact is there's no guidance out there in many states. And so you can't complain when kids are getting injured and killed and there's no guidance in your state. That's a huge issue to me. In other words, I'm leaving it up to people who don't know better. And even if you looked at those policies, the reason I wrote those is the websites are right there for each state's policy. Don't reinvent the wheel. Go out there and find, I mentioned the 5, Colorado, Wisconsin, Illinois, that had good ones.
Right.
So if you're not an expert in the area and if your school doesn't have one, go out there and copy what you like from the thing. But other ones are awful. They have like one paragraph where they mention something about it very briefly. And there's also a difference between policy and guidelines. Most states push for just guidelines. Well, guidelines are strictly optional. I don't have to follow them if I don't want to.
Right.
You can have the best guidelines in the world, and if I'm not required to follow them, you can say drive 55. But if it's just a guideline, well, heck, I'm going to drive 155 down the road.
Right. Well, states do choose their own speed limits in many ways.
And it could be very dangerous in different ways.
Well, that's true. And that's been an issue in the educational field as a whole in the United States. There really isn't any model per se, but a lot of different types of wheels out there.
And one of the issues we're trying to do is get a standardized system of best practices out there, evidence-based practice. And one of the issues that I have huge with seclusion is it's not an evidence-based practice.
Well, there isn't a lot of evidence out there, is there?
There's a lot of need for research in the area. And the biggie is I can understand the argument that people will make because the restraint saying it's a safety issue. If a child's attacking somebody, you have to, how do you respond? That's a safety issue.
Right.
But seclusion, again, is if it's not an evidence-based procedure, and I'm telling you is the basic concept of de-escalation is when we get upset, our personal boundary space increases. So the fact that you're closing in on me and then you're going to physically put your hands on me and drag me to a room that I don't want to be in, you're throwing fuel on the fire. You're doing everything the opposite of what you should be doing in a de-escalation scenario.
Merrill, sorry we've had the technical glitches with you.
Yeah, me too, because I made some really excellent points when we were disconnected. But, the issue, there's a lot of issues with seclusion, and, not everybody's going to respond the same way. One of the things, most of the schools I deal with don't even have seclusion rooms, and the one that I do deal with has a very good one. People do forget, though, that all of these types of interventions have strengths and weaknesses. I've worked clinically with individuals where seclusion rooms worked fabulously because their behavior was reinforced by physical contact from staff, which is unavailable while you're in a seclusion room. Seclusion rooms have a lot of virtues over physical holding. Physical holding have a lot of their own virtues, but they also have a lot of weak sides. So it's kind of an interesting thing, I think. It's unfortunate that people want to, and in many organizations I work with, they are limited not because seclusion might not be appropriate, a timeout room, a seclusion room. They're limited because that's the policy. And what it forces is physical restraint when that may not be the most appropriate for that individual. And seclusion is not appropriate for certain individuals, particularly individuals with self-injurious behaviors. It's completely contraindicated. But I think that there are some individuals for whom it would be clinically contraindicated. I've done it before. I've worked with them before. But some may argue that that's something that's better off for a residential setting, and they may be right. But I just don't want people to get the impression that seclusion is worthless. It isn't.
Well, the problem with seclusion, one of the main problems that I find with it is the same as exclusion timeouts when teachers use it inappropriately. The first thing to understand about seclusion is a timeout. Timeout will not work ever if the time-in environment is not reinforcing. If we're out playing basketball and I high elbow you and Merrill goes, Joe, sit down for 1 minute, I will comply in a second. Why? Because I want to get back into that time-in environment of playing basketball again. Sure. If I'm in a math class and I hate Mr. Merrill's math class and he sends me out to seclusion or whatever else because I'm acting out, I am being reinforced for doing that. And what you see is what I'll call frequent flyers. I'll see that certain students have been secluded 66, 80 times in an academic school year. And why? Because the student's been reinforcing for escaping the environment, as well as Mr. Merrill, if he's not aware of the behavioral concepts, because he lost an aversive in his classroom. And suddenly when Joey's gone, gosh, it's nice in my classroom. I can teach my curriculum and everything. So you see this frequent flyer effect and not understanding the behavioral concept. Right there, Merrill, I'll turn it over to you. Not understanding the behavioral concepts itself it makes it very ineffective. And teachers, what I see is it's, Einstein's definition of insanity. I look at the frequent flyer and I go, if it didn't work 60 times previously, what could possibly make you think it was going to work now? Circle the slow learner. It ain't the student.
Right.
I'm sorry, Merrill. Go ahead, sir.
No, that's fine. You see the same thing with restraint, and I've seen my share of that with seclusion rooms too. I just like to make the listeners aware that there really is, in my estimation, and I've used all of them, there is no evil about mechanical restraint. There is no evil about physical holding. There is no evil about seclusion rooms. It is the lack of judgment in using them. I've been in classrooms before. A young man was sent to a seclusion room because he burped. And then when he was in the seclusion room, it was a nonstop party because he could see the other children through the window and he was barking, making noises. And it was probably the best thing that happened to him all day. I was requested by a classroom to assist transporting one of their individuals to the principal's office. I said, can't you just time him out right here? He's already outside. He's not doing anything. No, he has to go to the principal's office. We transported him up to the principal's office. I would say that it was the most fun he had all day long. He picked his feet up and he was floating along the corridor waving to the other children. And it was easily the most fun he'd had all day. And, it's these similar types of things. He didn't want to be in the classroom, just like the kid who, had a party in the seclusion timeout room. And so, they are horribly misused, and they will continue to be horribly misused. I think until people not just have policies and not just have trainings, but some things take clinical judgment and oversight. Yes. And unfortunately, most of the teachers, they're teachers. Right. They're not clinicians. No. And they're being sometimes unwillingly, sometimes unwittingly, being put in the role of clinician, not just teacher. And they're not clinicians. No. And they don't have the judgment that a clinician would have. And it's not fair to them.
And it's not just teachers, it's also administrators as well.
Administrators as well. So there's a lot of issues to handle, I think. And if we are going to put teachers, even though we don't call it this, if we are going to put teachers somewhat in the role of clinician and somewhat in the role of behavior therapist, and they not only need the tools, they not only need the training, they need supervision. They need supervision. Without good supervision, everything goes down the tubes. You can do whatever you want, and if there's no good supervision, it's over. So I think that people have to start looking to that as well, and not just say this is a problem we can train away, because you can't train it away. You can give them the best crisis management training. You can give them as much as you like. People's behavior will tend to drift. There's going to be judgment calls to be made. As I alluded to before, who says that the danger is truly imminent? Who says that what's imminent is actually going to be dangerous? That's usually the teacher.
And most of the time when we deal with court cases, it's after the fact.
Sure. So there's a lot of nuts and bolts to tighten down on this thing for sure. Yeah.